very warm welcome to the speaker, to all the participants. It's a matter of great privilege for me to introduce Leela. She's a dancer, a teacher, a writer, an actress, a choreographer of Bharatnatyam. She's been deeply influenced by the philosophy and work of Rukmini Devi and has written a book on her titled Rukmini Devi Alive. She formed the dance group Spanda to revive the traditional vocabulary of Bharatnatyam. She has served as the director of Kalakshetra, chairperson of the Sangeet Natak Akademi, and the Central Board of Film Certification. She's received many awards, the Padma, Shri, Nritya Chudamani, Sangeet Natak Academy Award, and the Natya Kalacharya Award. She's been the subject of documentary films and has also acted in many films. I'm truly excited and looking forward to hearing you speak on the topic today. Thank you.
Namaste to all of you who are with us today. I feel extremely honored to be able to talk about not just my alma mater, but also about my guru, Srimati Rukmini Devi. I don't think there is much discussion on Kalakshetra's very vital contribution, in my opinion, to not only national life, but also to the dance and various other subjects which I'd like to touch upon. But primarily art. First of all, it's very important to understand when Kalakshetra was begun, because Kalakshetra was begun in 1936, just prior to our independence. And everybody in the country, any thinking person, feeling person, the poor and rich alike were caught up in the fervor of the national movement for freedom. Gandhiji was a name, but there were many others as well who were leaders in the various pockets of India. And one of those leaders was, in fact, an English woman, Annie Besant. She had fired the imagination of South Indians because she was speaking on behalf of India's freedom and took that message all the way to England. But I'm not here to speak about her. I only would like to say that Rukmini Devi was a child of that, the Theosophical movement. She had married George Arundel, who was a disciple of Annie Besant. And when the institute began, it began with that fervor. So it does have a nationalistic stirring in it, in its conception. In 1936, things were at a boil, and she and others who sat in contemplation of such an institute were very interested in creating or a resurgence, if you like, a return to India's repositories of wisdom and educational system, which was the ashram, the Gurukula. And there were many national leaders who were asking the question, is there an alternative to the British system of education, the public schools? And Rukmini Devi was very vociferous in her belief in the life of an ashram or the life of a Gurukula, where our ancient wisdom and learning was very much prevalent. But she pleaded for a return to that. So when Kalakshetra and the Besant School were started, it was with this simple living and high thinking quality that the institute was begun. And so there was very simple thatched cottages in which great learning took place, with an emphasis on the arts. But there was also a universal or a universality in the thinking. And when people started institutions with a very high ideal, it served to take that institute forward for a very long time, because the ideal was so perfect, the ideal was so exalted, if you like. You have to get the formula right. And I think that's what, quite impartially, if I had to look upon it, I would say that they got it right. The reason being that the institute is past its 75th year. And she was there for a good 50 years of the life of the Institute when it was soaring in terms of the quality of art, the quality of education that it was providing. But it was also a new India, an India that had looked upon the world and wanted to be included in that world. And so it was inclusive. The Institute included every single individual, uh, irrespective of their caste, of their creed, of their religious bias, of their status. Uh, there was no bar on who could come to the International Center of Arts, which is what it was originally called. Later, it became known as Kalakshetra. What did she do to do this? She called the old Vadyars, the old gurus, elderly people who had been sitting in pockets of South India, but who hadn't had an opportunity to reach the young child of the day. And she brought them back to the institute and asked them to teach in a Gurukula environment. So they were now teaching people from outside their village, outside their little town, wherever they were teaching. And it gave them a huge impetus, even though they were very elderly. Most of them were in their 70s, 80s, 90s, but they did such prolific work at that time. It is also an education that believed in all religions. As you know, theosophy is a form of that each may follow their own path to enlightenment. And so there was a recitation of prayers from all religions. It was inclusive. There was a bonding, and again, it was to build a nation which would where everybody would come together, irrespective of their religious bias. So this respect for elders, this respect for the guru, not only the guru, but all elders, for children, for animals, for nature, for the trees around us, for artisans, poor artisans, for weavers, this became part of the institute's uh, it modeled itself on an inclusive India, if you like. Um, and she pleaded at the national level for a return to all men and women of India to wear the handloom spun garment, whether it was a dhoti or whether it was a sari. Um, whether it happened or not is for all of you all to see. That even now there is a case for us to return to the handwoven garment, because it provided India with an identity. It provided India with respect in the world of handlooms and in the world of beautiful clothing. There was an emphasis in the institute, and now I'm coming to the actual contribution to the arts. There was an emphasis on words like bhakti, shraddha, sadhana, and it was not just the use of the word, but to understand what it meant to be committed to something. If you were committed to anybody or anything, an ideal, it was a declaration of your bhakti, of your devotion to that ideal. Shraddha, of course, meant hard work, and we all know that you cannot be a sportsman or an artist or anybody in any field if you don't have that sense of commitment to duty, to commitment to do something again and again and again till you get it right, until you get it so fine that the world turns around and looks at you and says, "Wow." Sadhana is contemplative practice. It's not just practicing wildly, mildly, but actually where there's contemplation on the act of practice. And this was part of uh, that whole training. Now, what did she do actually for the form of Bharatanatyam? Bharatanatyam suddenly now, with her involvement, and it was her moving into a space where she was not permitted to enter, because the form of Bharatanatyam, like many other dance forms in India, were the prerogative of a small community of dancers, natwanars, musicians, where they felt it was their birthright uh, to to be the upholders of those traditions. And I think part of the national thinking, or her wide view, opinion was that it is the art form of a nation and must be made available to any child of any denomination who wishes to honor his or her tradition, and that it cannot be the prerogative they may also be the carriers of that tradition, but it should also be in a democratic way available to every child in this country. And so I think with her Brahmin background, entering the space of the Devadasi, entering the space of the Natvanars, she gave the art form a status in the eyes of the public. Uh, it wasn't enough that the British had an opinion. Our rulers at that time had an opinion about these art forms and about what was happening in the temples and the rituals and things like that. They had a certain opinion, and it wasn't also her desire to change that opinion in any way. I don't think she also wanted to change the conservative nature of those who or the conservative reaction of the Natvanars and the Devadasis. I think she was only pleading that everyone should have access, like it is in any other country of the world. Ballet, anybody can learn ballet, anybody can perform ballet. But in her country, it was coveted by a particular group of people. And now, due to her, every or any young girl or boy in this country can access the art form. Because of her training, early training in ballet from the great, Anna Pavlova, everybody knows the story. She met her on a ship when she was traveling to Australia with her husband. And Anna Pavlova and her company were traveling, uh, in the Far East at that time, performing in different cities. And everywhere she stopped to perform, of course, Rukmini Devi with her beautiful sari, very young girl of 18, 19, she was watching from the wings. And Anna Pavlova sort of realized that she seemed to be interested in the art form. And so she said, Cleo Nordi is one of my students in Australia, she'll train you. Now, the training in ballet, I think it was enough to spark in this young girl who hadn't learned Bharatnatyam till then, or any Indian art form till then. It sparked in her a respect, a newfound respect for the body and how the body is utilized in movement. And ballet had already systematized it. They had already discovered the weaknesses and the strengths of a singular body. And so this was passed on to her. The training of that body, of the muscles, of the arms, of the limbs, how you held your head, how you stretched an arm, how you used space in time. This was something that was just must have blown her mind, because she was filled with it. She was a young bride, actually. Had married a gentleman, an Englishman, many years her senior, but that didn't deter her from wanting to learn so many things about the universe and what it had to. She went to all the art galleries and all. Now, why I'm saying this is that she brought back this very universal viewpoint, if you like. And when she learned Bharatanatyam soon, very soon after her return, it infused the form with a new understanding of body, of line, of structure, of also she had a good knowledge of the temples and their Indian sculptural models, and the whole idea of, her father was a Vedanta scholar, so she was well versed in Indian, the Upanishads and the Ramayana and all. He would read the Ramayana to them in Sanskrit every evening, the family. He had 8 children. She was the 6th of that of those children. So she was well versed, and her mother sang. So she knew the ragas, she knew the talas, but she came back with an added strength, if you like, a resilience, and brought that to bear on this new art form, on this very, very ancient art form. So what it did, I'm speaking now as a student of that form, it made the form extremely resilient, very purposeful, very dynamic, but also very contemplative, because she was very, very interested. As a theosophist, she was interested in religions, all religions. And so she was interested in applying the, the philosophy of Hinduism, the philosophy of Buddhism to these to this sahitya and to these forms. She was asking questions. Why is it the musician in the concert platform in South India sings a particular set of kritis and varnams, and the dancer only performs another set of items which are not mutually performed? And she asked those. Only now we are breaking down those barriers. Many decades after her passing, but she asked those questions in the 1940s, when it was totally, it was, everybody was nonplussed. Why would she want to perform something that Dikshitar, for instance, had composed? But she asked the question, why are we not performing Dikshitar? Why are we not performing a Tyagaraja Kriti? So, and she learned all the beautiful items of the Tanjore Quartet. So she had access to all those, but she was also wanting to probe into these other beautiful traditions. Uh, she made the art extremely responsible and aware of its impact on society. Because I have to emphasize that she was one of the early members of parliament. She was filled with that. The people who were part of those early government of an independent India were filled with the passion of uh, returning to India's roots, of moving ahead, but also holding on to its traditions and its all the beautiful things that they could pass on to their children. Um, Unfortunately, they weren't very successful in that, I have to admit, because we are very extremely westernized in many ways, but not the majority of people. The majority of Indians actually are the ones who are rooted in our traditions. But she made people understand that it had a certain, these art forms had a standing in our society and must be respected, not as a form that can be given the go by, but something that we should hold up and revere, as they did ballet in the West. She said, these are our great art forms. They must be respected. She also did something for the art form, which was not, I think, part of an agenda earlier. It was never an educational program. It was never an intellectual pursuit. It was always something that was done as part of the rituals of the temple. And therefore, it had a certain purpose. There were a certain type, certain members of society who were the performers of that form. They were extremely beautiful dancers. They were extremely dedicated people. Uh, but when she entered that fray, she was asking, uh, probing the intellectual import of these beautiful ideas that were coming out, whether they were Shringar based, whether they were Bhakti based, but also what was the Sahitya, where did, all this beautiful material, for instance, the dance dramas of that time, which were being performed in villages all over India, the Melatur Bhagavata Mela, the Kuruvanjis, the Tirukut, the so-called the predecessors to our solo forms were the dance drama forms. These were actually theatrical forms where the actor would be both dancing, singing, um, taking the character of one or another person, but also delivering speech. So they did something more than what the dancer today does. They were also the singers. Most of the top actors of that time in these dance drama productions, they also sang. So it was very, very interesting for her, and she revived those traditions and brought them onto the stage through her own involvement. But she raised the bar of the quality of music that was accompanying Bharatanatyam. I think she involved some very, very great musicians of the time. There was Mysore Vasudevacharya, there was Tiger Varadacharya and his brother Krishnamacharya, there was the great Sambashivayar Tata who played Veena, there was Budulu Krishnamurti Shastrigal, there was M.D. Ramanathan, Ramaswamy Iyengar, Krishnaswamy Iyengar, all these really veteran musicians. When she brought them to Kalakshetra to teach, she actually was giving the new young Indian who was coming, child who was coming to learn, she was giving them the tradition through these wonderful masters who were very, very traditional people. And by doing so, you learned something that was beyond the actually Sarali Varse or the Gita or the Kriti. You learned about, you were in touch with the actual repositories of India's traditions. And that was a whole new, which children today don't have that opportunity to meet up with a Bhagavata, to meet up with a Vadyar of that standing, because they had their own morals, their own sense of, expansion of the mind, their way of looking at life. What she also did with the art forms, and I think she influenced a whole generation of people in other art forms that were being formed, is that the proscenium stage, which she created, which she sort of literally was again impressed by the ballet that she had seen in the West. And she had gone to the best theaters and she had seen the best lighting. And she came back to Resurgent India and wanted to improve the level of the lighting, the sound, the quality of sound, how the musicians sat. Were they going to follow the dancer up and down as they traditionally did? They stood behind the dancer and kind of like encompassed her and then moved with her when she went forward, because that's what they did in the temple. But she was the first one to make them, sit down on the side of the stage where they were visible and where the dancer had the space for herself. But also the way the wings and the nepatya of the stage, where the curtains were, all this were pleated curtains at the back, something that nobody does today, which she was so particular about. The beauty of the stage, the cleaning of the stage. These were things that she was really very, very interested in, because she really felt that it's how you present yourself, which was absolutely sacred. The other thing that she did, which we have to appreciate, is that she created for the first time a pedagogical system of teaching the art form. And she created a vocabulary. The vocabulary, many Natvanars that I knew of that time, they were very clear in stating that they only had a very limited number of adavas and limited number of knowledge into the mudras and the theory and the Sanskrit texts, the Natya Shastra, Abhinay Darpanam. They were, or the Silapatikaram, they didn't really need it. Scholarship was on one side and practitioners were on the other side. There was no meeting of these grounds. I think Kalakshetra brought the scholar and the dance and the practitioners of the arts together in one institute. So what you suddenly now had was theory being taught, the Vedas being taught, mythology being taught, dance dramas being done, a pedagogy existing for first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh years of training. And suddenly all this became available, not just to our children, but the word had spread, so that they, Kelucharan Mahapatra and many other great gurus of Orissa, they took courage from this. And they started looking at the Abhinay Chandrika, which was their text. In Kerala, Vallatol was doing some amazing work with Kathakali. They had their texts. So they started creating these pockets of training institutions where everything came together for the student of dance. She also delved in dance dramas. So she created a way of not just the solo format of these classical forms, but she touched upon dance dramas like Bengali Shyama and the Gita Govind Jayadev's Sanskrit, or Kalidasa's Kumarasambhavam, or Kutrala Kurvanji's and Andal Charitrams in Tamil, the Ramayana from the entire Sanskrit tradition. So she started, doing these different languages. She did Buddha Charitram, which was one of the most beautiful presentations on the Buddha. And so she literally, in my opinion, taught the new Indian child, a child born in free India, how to honor his or her traditions. And in that sense, she created a true nationalist, somebody who is had no bias towards one or another, uh, against or for any one religious group. She just brought everybody together and tried to iron out the differences between the old and the new, between traditionalists and modernists, between scholars and practitioners, between the child and these very, very elderly people. So in doing so, and with her own, we can never stop talking about her, but with her interest in vegetarianism, in animal welfare, in theosophy, because of that, all of us who admired her so deeply imbibed some of these values that she gave to all of us. Thank you very much. Please.
At Wishwa, one of our core philosophies is obviously preservation of heritage crafts and art forms. And I was wondering if you could speak a little to that and the importance of preserving these art forms, and what one can do, or what as a generation we can do to encourage younger folk to get interested in this, and sort of carry the torch forward for future generations.
Mr. Rao, I'm delighted at your question, but I have to quote Rukmini Devi on that. When India set up the first Sangeet Natak Academy in Delhi, which was supposed to be an institute that would preserve. You use that word, so I have to repeat it. I've also been chairperson of that. The honor of being chairperson of that organization for 4 years. When Rukmini Devi, when she was a member of parliament, she was asked what she thought about the institute. Naturally, in fact, she was part of much of the movement, and she had a very typical to her kind of answer. She said, "When you use the word preservation, I think of pickles." And she said, "Those are bottled up and kept to be savored." In India, our art forms are not to be bottled up or preserved in that sense as namunas, as something that is, put on the shelf and everybody says, this is our art form. She said these are living art forms. They are resident in the hearts and bodies of hundreds and thousands of our people. Whether it's your grandmother's particular way of making a dish, whether it's that potter in a village in Uttar Pradesh, whether it's a weaver in Kashmir, or whether it's a man who makes the jewelry for the Kathakali artists in Kerala. Each of these people are continuing to be the living, traditions of our country, and that is the way it will survive. If we encourage them to teach their children or their children around there who might be interested, the way to do it is to pass it on through educative programs and to make people. Frankly, I don't even believe that there should be any worry on whether our children are interested or not. We have students far more than we can manage. Children are all naturally inclined towards our art forms because they are so representative of who they really are. You mistake a child because you feel that if they're my child and I don't have any interest in Kodiyatam, then they probably won't have. You're wrong. If they had a sniff of it, they would be doing it, or they'd certainly be interested in watching it, or certainly be interested in getting involved, because you have to be able to give them the scent of these forms. They have the opportunities to learn. I don't think we have to do much more. We have to encourage our weavers. We have to see that they always have their looms, moving. That is the only way of doing it. And for that, we have to wear Indian. We have to buy Indian. We've got to reject. We've got to make some sacrifices.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was actually quite interesting that you call them living art forms. And I think in many, many ways, that's what they are. And I have a follow-on question. when you say living art forms and most living things are part of an evolutionary process,
Yes.
and because as non-experts, when we think of, say, Bharatnatyam, we think, okay, it's an ancient dance form, and it has been that way for perhaps centuries. What sort of evolution do you think you have seen in the past 50 years, or if we might call it modern India? If you can speak to that.
Mani, nothing that I do today is anything. It's not. It's definitely not what my gurus and my seniors did. What they did was not what their gurus did. Nobody actually knows what the so-called original form was. When you say these are ancient art forms, I think we should stop calling them ancient. They're extreme. If I am a child of the 1960s and I'm performing it, it is modern for me. If a child of this century is performing it, it is modern because that child is doing it. That person is modern enough for you to believe that if they are doing it, it is their speak. You know what I mean? So these art forms do not, you cannot box them up in a word and say that they are ancient. They just, living is ancient. But we are not what our grandparents were. We're different. We think differently. We do some things which are like them. We may have some of their genes, but we're not them. They lived in a previous century. We are living today. We have a new way of speaking. We have a new way of communicating. Uh, so I'm not worried because I really feel that these forms are, when you say they're living forms, they will live as long as we carry them. We are only carriers for a while. We are blessed to be a carrier for a little while. If your child learns it tomorrow, they have a sense of that responsibility of carrying something very, very beautiful. But it's beautiful today and now. I'd rather not think of it as something that, uh, you know, I'm not carrying Mohenjo-daro on my shoulders. I'm carrying an art form that is pulsating with my energy, with my love, with my devotion. I love the way it speaks to me. I love the way I can express myself. That's how I'd like to look at it.
Amazing, ma'am. Thank you. So my family and I, we've been working with handloom weavers for several decades now. And one of our primary concerns is livelihoods. And I wanted to ask you, of course, with the COVID context, no doubt, but even beyond COVID or before COVID, say we have, if any of our speakers have children that are interested in pursuing performing arts, Indian traditional dance forms, as their main source of livelihood or their main profession. How difficult or hard would you say it is to make a consistent livelihood, and how has that affected our artists in the current COVID scenario?
Fortunately, Mani, we have artists who have really survived on little or nothing, including all of us from our generation. But we've done it with a joy, I'm sure every artist has felt the pinch, and our poorer artists have really, really, it has been horrible. Many have committed suicide on the first wave of COVID. Many people have given up their performance schedules naturally and are selling vegetables or whatever. But the thing for us to remember is that if these art forms have survived, they have survived because people have made huge sacrifices in not living the life that they could have lived. And I'm saying this because we are not from traditional families. We are people whose parents have said the same thing. Oh, you dance, do you? But then what do you actually do? This is a normal question because we don't earn the kind of salaries when we start out that a young person today and the tragedy is this too, that most of the South Indian Carnatic musicians of our time now the young people of our time who are in their 30s now are engineers, IIT professionals. They've all done the, the highest form of study before becoming a professional musician or a dancer. We have lawyers, we have accountants, we have so many people who could have done another thing. That's what I mean. So if they've done it and they've chosen it, it's out of a sense of, something that pulls you from the heart. Why is a weaver still a weaver and not a stone, not breaking stone somewhere or something? Because he believes that that loom is sacred for him. As long as that loom is in the house, he thinks that he's living an honorable life, even if he doesn't have food to eat. So it's a something that is very difficult to explain to others when they say, no, but what do you actually do? And you say, this is it for me. For this lifetime, this is it. I hope I'm a millionaire next life.
In the Western world, if one were asked what do you do and they said I'm a ballet dancer, the next question would not be, oh, okay, but what do you actually do?
It would be. It may not. Yeah, because they also live very poorly, and they also have huge. There is injury levels are very high in the West, and in fact, the Indian art forms, because we use the flat of our foot, we don't have that kind of. Ours is more yogic, and therefore, we also do pranayama and things like that. So we lead. I think we lead healthier lives, but um, yeah, the idea of artists all over the world is that most of them have struggled. You can read the lives of the great painters of the West, of poets, they've had pretty miserable lives, and they became multi-millionaire after they died. Their paintings sold. You can't look at Degas. I don't know who lives off his works, but not in his lifetime. So this is the thing, that art is beyond a calculable richness, if you like. It's not about that. It's about what touches the heart. It's about what moves a society to be better people, to be better than yourself. To become somebody who has an ideal just beyond your own reality. That is the possibility of art.
Amazing, ma'am. We have a few questions from the audience. What I'll actually do is I'll take one question and sort of expand it a little more. So Jivita Ravipati is talking about the function that art plays in educating society. And I think when I was a child, growing up, my father would tell me about when he was a child back in his village in Andhra Pradesh. There'd be traveling troops of performers that would come to his village every so often. And that would be the high point of their quarter or their month. And they would bring news of elsewhere, news of events. It would be history being retold. In our current society, of course, this has been replaced by media and Netflix and documentaries and YouTube.
Yes.
Do you feel, and forgive me for asking it this way, but do you feel that that function of art has been lost in the modern context? And if yes, what has replaced? What function has replaced?
I think art in various forms. It does. You don't have to go somewhere to buy it. You don't have to go somewhere to see it always. Even if you take a child to the beach, it's an education. You can draw on the sand. You can make a little something with the sand. This is art. Art is something parents can make too for them. With an old, a chocolate wrapper, you make a little doll and put a stick in it. And it's not expensive to be artistic, and it's certainly not important that you look for a reason to give your child art. Art is a manner of speaking. Art is a way you communicate. Art is how you feel about somebody who doesn't agree with you, who has opinions that are at variance with yours, political ideologies that don't fit in with your thinking, but to be able to discourse it, to be able to agree to disagree. This is the purpose of art. I mean, a child can be groomed to that other side, the inner growth of your soul, if you like, uh, with a connection to things that are beautiful, even through books or through talking to elderly people, to be allowed to speak to a tata or party in or around their building who has information about a life that their parents are not living. But that access and that compassion and that ability to reach out, to be nurtured by somebody else, a servant. Our servants have repositories of knowledge. Many of them, maybe less today than before, but when we were children, our parents left us with them, and they talked to us about so many beautiful things and sang songs to us to put us to sleep. This was tradition. This was art, and it soothed our minds, and we never felt that our parents were not with us on those nights. So I think, Mani, that art is to be found everywhere. It's available. We don't look at it like that. We think that if we go to a concert, we are introducing our child to art. No, I don't think so.
Thank you, ma'am. You had mentioned something a little earlier about injury. And this is specifically, I'm talking about performing arts, be it theater or dance. And, over the past couple of decades, our sportsmen, if we only take Indian sportsmen, for example, there have been a lot of advances in nutrition and in other areas. Is there anything like that for dancers? Is there any such advances?
There isn't. Everyone is left to their own remedies. They all have a Vaid or a Asari somewhere in Kerala who gives them a massage, and that's probably safer, by the way. But it's a lot to do about honing in your knowledge of food and its value, of how much and how little you should be or not eating, depending on your body type, the hours of that you will eat or not eat. Because performance is something, your body has to be light, yet it has to be energized with enough energy to take you through a 2-hour solo concert. So it's not only about maintaining a figure. It's also about having those muscles and those knowledge of how the system works, and also they need, because we do so much abhinay, to have a mind that is free of other hassles, a heart that can express itself when required, to get into the persona of another person and speak their thoughts, their feelings. It's not easy to do that. Most of the time, I could be, I'm not in the mood for this. I don't want to do that Naika or this Naika, or this role or that role. But we are playing roles. We all play roles. We have duties. We have ways in which other people look at us. You're a son, but you're also a grandson. You're also a brother. These are roles. This is role playing, and you want to be the best in that. You want to be a good friend to a female friend. You also want to be a good friend to your male friends. And sometimes those don't, by the way, tally, because the boys want to do things which girls are not, and vice. I mean, this is life. It's full of vagaries, and yeah, I think I think we have to be able to, and that's the wonderful thing about art in school. Even is that a child gets an opportunity to live outside their body type. I could have a bad hand or a forgetful, but when I'm in a play with other children and I have to do this or do that, I forget. I'm out of a body experience. It is and that's what's beautiful, is that it can be inclusive if the teachers are kind and compassionate. It can be inclusive of children who have autism, or children who have dyslexia, or children who have a bad polio leg, or whatever. it's possible in art to be able to include somebody, because it doesn't have to be perfect. For perfection has to be left with the great ones. But art is available at any level, and yeah, I think we have to think out of the box, don't you think, Mani?
Yeah, absolutely, ma'am. I
one,
completely
one of
agree.
our problems is that we're all so psyched into behaving in a stereotype fashion that we even ask questions that are stereotype. We don't think that we don't need that question. We just need to do it our way. Just do it your way. Just enjoy life and see how you can make it better for another person.
Uh, I think we have time for one last question. This is actually Harshita's question.
Yeah.
She would like to know where do you see Kalakshetra going from here, and where would you want it to go going forwards? And Harshita, if you have anything else to add to this question, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Harshitas asked me a very difficult question, which I don't really want to answer. But I will tell you this, Harshita. I don't think, I think institutes, I started by telling you that good institutions were formed with a very high sense of idealism. And their original mandate was so pure and so came so much from the heart and was so intelligent that the institute, sort of rolled out those ideas for 50 years, maybe even 60 years. After that, I don't think any one of us was worthy of carrying on that tradition, because, and I say this really seriously, because we were not perhaps groomed to, or didn't make an effort to understand that original idealism. So you change things thinking that it's modern enough to do that, but also you're bringing in what happens in institutions is, your mother may have said to you once in your lifetime, I don't want you to do that, and then many times you must have got away with the opposite, but you'll remember that one thing and use it as a whip to tell your children that they should never do it because my mother didn't let me do it. Now this is utter stupidity, in my opinion. Uh, the institute may not be the institute it was, and I'm not saying that out of nostalgia, but I'm saying it out of we are not a nation of institution builders. The British are. They know how to build institutions that survive 300, 500 years. We are great individuals, people with outstanding idealism, outstanding ideas, but coming together and making something work and re-energizing it and refiguring it for every new decade that is to come. I don't know whether we're very good at that. We can't sit at a table and talk about it. And also, idealism in teaching has completely gone out of the window. People are harsh and hard because it's a great institution, and you have that institution behind you to say, you will do it like this and no other way. That's not the way it works in private society. As a teacher, I know when I had to teach, it was always, do you think we might do it like that? Or do you think this is a good idea? That's the way to teach, is to be kind, to be compassionate as well. Uh, I'm not happy with what I hear, but that's just me, and I don't have to be considered. I think an institution, as long as that idealism exists in individuals, the institution is them. It doesn't have, that place itself is not sacred to me. It's the idealism that it has passed on, which is very sacred.
Thank you, ma'am. If you don't mind, I see some raised hands from the audience. Hi, Diansha.
Namaste, ma'am. Firstly, I would like to say what an honor it is to hear you today. So I am a student in grade 12. I'm pursuing my IB diploma in Bharatnatyam as my core subject, along with other subjects, obviously. I am actually doing a research on to what extent is ballet and Bharatnatyam, which are two very distinct forms of dance, similar or different. I would really love your opinion on that.
there's, when you're dealing with the body, Diansha, then it all starts with the same, you have the same, it's the same instrument. It's like, what is the difference between a Japanese master, painter and somebody who's a very, Hussein or somebody in the West, or they all use the same brush. So for us, the body is the starting point. This mind is the starting point. This heart that we carry, this set of emotions that encompass the person called the individual, is the starting point. And in that sense, they're all the same. You still have to bend a knee, you still have to take a leap, you still have to twirl around on one foot, you still got to stamp your feet if you like. The forms take very definitive, different approaches to how you bend your knee. In the West, in ballet also they plie, they train to plie. We also do these aramandis and murumandis, which are extremely similar. We may not lift the foot like they do, but we do jumps of various kinds. We have other longish, extended postures which are different to them. We also have a whole galaxy of mythological deities and characters whom we imitate. The Lord of Dance, Lakshmi, Saraswati, is that. So we have postures which they don't actually have to adopt at all. So there are points of difference, there's points of coming together. They also have Cupid there, we have Manmatha here. I mean, there could be, it's a long conversation. It's difficult to sort of, I don't want to, I think their diversity, even between Kathakali and Bharatnatyam, between Bharatnatyam and Kuchipudi, the diversity is what is absolutely beautiful about them. And me being different from you, Diansha, is what's beautiful about you, and it might be what's beautiful about me, is that we have a different, coming from different places, different times maybe, but that we can connect like this is the point about life, that we can connect irrespective of our differences, as long as we wish to communicate an idea, a thing, an ideology, a feeling mostly. And if it's warm and if it's understanding of the other's point of view, then that's what makes it even more interesting. We can fight as well, but that's also pretty interesting, but not on this forum. But true, the forms don't clash anywhere. They're just different. They come out of, in the West, they were aspiring, if you see their cathedrals and all, they were aspiring towards an upward, reaching God in a way that was of a particular time. Perhaps that would took them up. We are very into the earth kind of people. We believe in Prithvi as the goddess, the mother, and we revere the floor upon which we dance or play, or so it's just a whole different approach. They have trees that cars can go through. We have banyan trees that spread this way but are not very high at all. But it's just that the philosophy of these countries and the time in which that art form blossomed were different. They were post-war. That was a very post-World War impetus that threw ballet up into the air. Ours have been ancient forms, as Mani started by saying, the very ancient forms, like a river, very perennial, a quality of everybody's contributing towards its further pathway down to the ocean. It's just a different way of looking at things. Makes it very interesting.
Thank you so much for that, ma'am. May I ask one more question if there's time?
Sure. Go ahead.
Through my research, I have come to realize that starting from Rukmini Devi Arundale and E. Krishna Iyer to today, there has been a lot of changes in Bharatnatyam.
Sure.
So what are your feelings about it?
There's no art form that has, the answer, there's no art form in the world that hasn't changed. It's like languages. The words we use today, your grandfather would be appalled to use them. Hey, things like that. They are cool. They never used words like that. So if they've come into the thing, and even Indian words, uh, languages are constantly changing, art forms are constantly changing, uh, and it's about who is performing them and how that person is making the ball spin, if you like. So I think I think for the art forms, if they are changing, it's wonderful, because it means that they are dynamic, and whatever's not worthy of or doesn't have the staying power to survive will fall by the wayside without doubt, and whatever has the quality of resilience from within will survive. And people follow trends. They usually follow uh, uh, I see a lot of young dancers following trends that are either because they're popular, because they get heads turning and things like that. Then there's the other type of artist who is just very quietly uh, doing their thing, and passing on the tradition, and improving upon it, or contributing towards it in some way, very quietly doing it, and their names are the ones that survive as well. So, it's not about who makes heads turn, but it's also about what has the value of gold in it. I mean, it's without doubt, there has to be something that sustains, a core value that is sustained at the end of the day. And that's very important.
But ma'am,
Appearances are very deceptive. I mean, they may chalo for a while, but they don't sustain.
But ma'am, don't you think the true essence of the root or the roots of Bharatnatyam has been lost over the years? It's more used for stage purposes, is what I feel personally right
The
now.
roots, you're only talking about your experience of where you see it. If you traveled into our interiors, you'll see forms of Bharatnatyam which you may not like, by the way. But they're practicing them without an audience. They're doing it at village fairs. They're doing it at utsavs, when they have their various periodical utsavams. And you'll see forms of all the classical forms you'll see in the district areas in very kacha, sort of a little not sophisticated form, which is wonderful, which is what you're asking for. But very soon, so what happened with the Gotikua tradition? It was something that was done by young boys in a particular district, in a village, in a particular area. As soon as people got hold of it and said, "Oh, this is the rustic form. This is what is interesting." Today, it's become so glitzy and so not nice. You don't want to look at it. So what is the price you pay for coming out and becoming part of the hip and happening is something that we need to also look at very carefully, because when you add selling power to the game, and you sell it and spin it, and organizations say we have to have this, and so we brought many people out of their very nice isolated existences, and we brought them onto the stage in the big cities and sent them abroad even. But usually many of those artists have disappeared, and very sad, because they were wonderful artists, but they couldn't survive this other thing that was happening to them.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, Diansha. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Great question. Ma'am, thank you so much for talking to us today. There's a certain light in your eyes when you speak about these art forms, when you speak about the work that you do, and it's truly inspiring. It has moved me, and I'm sure it has moved several other audience members here. Thank you for all the work, all the good work you've done.